Hello and welcome back. This is Paolo, your host, and this is once more a conversation in artificial intelligence. So today, for the first time, we venture in the venture capital industry, although from an operational standpoint. And for the first time, we go and look at startups in healthcare. So with us today, we have Reza Kazemipour, who has been a operational partner for several venture capitals here in Silicon Valley, and he works with their portfolio companies in a variety of functions, including sales, marketing, and growth strategies. Hello, Reza. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Paolo. How are you?
I am very good, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
So I want to thank everybody who is coming back. It is an honor and privilege to have you here. And we now want to learn a little bit about Reza. So Reza, you kind of fall in the big picture of Silicon Valley chapters. Like if we look at your LinkedIn profiles, there are at least 20 companies into it. You know, for people that are from outside of Silicon Valley, this is kind of a little bit scary. And I'll say this, if you were to meet somebody in another country or somebody from your teenagerhood, how would you explain what you've been doing?
That's a great question. And you know, the benefit that I've always had is because I've been blessed to actually I was grown up here. I grew up in Silicon Valley from the age of 2 when my parents moved from Iran here into the Valley. And so a lot of the people that I see here on Sand Hill, for those of you who don't know, is one of the main roads where a lot of the venture capitalists have their offices. So a lot of the people here in the Valley are people that I grew up with and went to high school with. You know, back when I went, the last thing to be able to explain about startups or venture capital, you know, it'd be really difficult because that wasn't really the thing back then in the late 80s. So it started to percolate more and more as we got into the early and mid 90s, when you started hearing more about startup companies and the evolution of technology as a whole, when Apple started really coming out and competing against, you know, Windows and Microsoft and companies that were, you know, that we knew back then, which were the big ones like, you know, Hewlett Packard and the name brands. So, you know, if I were to go back into high school and explain to someone about Silicon Valley, I would say if you've ever gone to Los Angeles and you've had, you know, movie stars and actors and actresses that are your neighbors, that's really exactly what Silicon Valley is like today, because you have the CEOs of some of the largest companies from Intel, Yahoo, Google, Tesla that are your neighbors. You would never know, because unlike LA, when these guys are driving Bentleys and Ferraris and Rolls Royces, people out here are driving Teslas and Priuses. So you don't know, and they're, you know, wearing jeans and not $10,000 suits, but they are living in nice homes. That's the only difference. So that's really the best comparison if you compare it to Los Angeles to Silicon Valley, where it is today.
When I went to live in Los Angeles, that was back in the time. The first thing I noticed is that the number of BMW and Mercedes was like outrageous. And I've never seen a place in the entire world with so many BMW and Mercedes. And I always wondered, I mean, is everybody here a kind of a senior executive? Because
people are more, it's just more conservative, being under the radar. You know, they're not as flashy as they are down in Los Angeles. But, you know, they have just the same amount of, so now because of Silicon Valley, if you notice, there's Silicon Alleys, there's Silicon this, there's Silicon that. So very similar replicas of Silicon Valley are starting to pop up in all these different locations. Los Angeles being one, Miami being another one, New York, and then other parts of the world where they're trying to replicate kind of tech hubs. And that's really what Silicon Valley is. You have people from all over the country, all over the world that want to come here and sit on Sand Hill, sit at the coffee shop, or try to meet the right people to somehow get funding for their startup. It's really that process of meeting the right people, saying the right thing, right? That's going to get them interested about this thing that you have in your mind, about this, you know, world problem that you're solving, that's going to get them to write you a check.
Before we go into that, I'd like to take a closer look at who you are. So we know you've been working for all these VCs and various startups, but in the last few years, you have got interested in healthcare, fintech, and IoT. IoT is Internet of Things. And
Exactly.
what really prompted you to go into those sectors? Was more of kind of a market analysis type of thing, or there was some kind of emotional interest?
That's a great question. It's a little bit of both. So with all three of those industries, it's really at the platform level, it's the interest in big data analytics. And if you look at those three, from health tech, fintech to IoT, if you think about a hockey stick, they're right at this curve of the hockey stick where it's just about to grow. Health tech specifically for me has been a kind of a lifelong passion. I spent 8 years in the military, and learning more and more about the human body and how those efficiencies and deficiencies, once you learn what those things are, from a data perspective, that can come back and help you kind of identify specific diseases or whatever it might be on the consumer front. But on the military front, that extra 1, 2, 3% that we can give back to them, operators that are out in the field, to help them last a little bit longer, whether it's hydration or supplements or food intake, outtake, whatever that might be, to help them with those types of things.
It leads me to the next chapter of our conversation. That is, basically, if we look at healthcare today, where do you see this paradigm with data going? And why is it interesting to be in healthcare and, if you like, plus AI today?
Healthcare as a whole is very fragmented, and it's very different in every part of the world you go to. You know, if you look at the US, we have a lot of different providers that are giving us different plans. If you look at different parts of the world, you know, depending on what level you are and what you can afford is what you get. But the question in regards to healthcare and AI is a great question, because if you think about the data sets, if you have the right technologies that are coming in to help you build the data, because without data, you really don't have any AI or ML, right? There's no such thing as artificial intelligence or machine learning without the proper data. And in order to get that data, you need the right silos of technology. All the startups that we talked about and all the startups that I get involved in are data hubs that have the ability to intake the right form of data to feed into the AI and the ML to give you that proper output. So that's really the biggest problem today, is finding those technologies and applying them to the right areas of hospitals, of healthcare institutes, to bring in that data to tell the patient and the provider better about who they are and what they're doing.
From a patient perspective or the general public perspective, what it is, in your opinion, that they can expect in the next 1 or 2 or 3 years they'll be able to do that was not possible before?
So the 1-3 years, when we won't see a big change. It's really in the next decade. But in the next 1 to 3 years, it's really the escalation of telemedicine and how we can better utilize that. So if you think about a lot of the products that are out there today, you think about the 23andMe's, the Ubiomes, where you're receiving these kits, you're taking a test, and it's going back, and then you wait a few weeks and you get some results back, right? So that's evolving. Then you have other products where you can take a test in the privacy of your own home, like my last company. What they were doing is a basic urine analysis test that can tell men and women if they have any current infections coming out of their kidney, from UTIs to preeclampsia, pregestational diabetes. And these are things that you can do in the privacy of your own home, less than a minute, and get the results on your mobile device. And then take that data that you now own, it doesn't reside anywhere else, you now own, you can share that with your physician, and within a matter of minutes, get the right meds you need, if it's Cipro or whatever kind of antibiotics that need to be sent to you. This can be done under 5-10 minutes, versus the model today is very archaic and it's very broken. You still have to drive to a hospital or a physician, wait there, take a test, wait some more, come back, and this whole process can take anywhere from 1 to 3 hours and cost you hundreds of dollars. So where I see the future going is really more on the telemedicine side and being able to utilize technologies in that regards.
One of the things that is important out there is it is a critical task type of endeavor. Like, there is little space for error. How are startups going about this, making sure that things work and also that they're perceived as working? And where is the role of AI in that element?
Right. So, nothing's really guaranteed at 100%. So if it's the specific device, if we're talking about telemedicine, if it's a specific device, typically those devices have to be a class 2 510K. That's an FDA approved device that can give you some level of accuracy that the FDA has approved for you, right? So that's one level. On the data side, again, the more data that you accumulate, the better from an artificial intelligence and machine learning standpoint, it can learn these different models, learn about these different patients on what they experience, and then what the prescriptions were for each one of those patients. So the more data that comes in, the better the machine can learn to give you that diagnosis. Even with all that data, you still have to have the human touch, a physician that can give you that level of looking at this stuff, but in a simpler format that can give you the actual prescription.
So, Reza, that was an interesting insight. So basically, if I understood it correctly, there are two elements here. One is the validation of the device that is going to be used for telemedicine and detect or measure the patient status, basically. That's one element of it. The second element of it is all the data that are being transferred between the patients and the central intelligence, where the intelligence then will make some assessment of what the patient status is. So if we look now at this intelligence that basically, collects data and so on, what have you found so far being the, if you like, technology element that represent a net advantage for one application or for one company with respect to any other ones? Is only the data, or you have found kind of a recipe for success, if you like, that has to do with the technology that the startups have?
So the recipe is definitely that it has to start at the technology level. And just to go back, the assessments that physicians can make now, because if you imagine physicians that work today, they see anywhere from 50 to 70 patients a day. They can only assess based on what they know. But once you start opening that floodgate of other patients and other physicians across the globe, based on that specific problem, if it's diabetes, if it's whatever that specific problem is the patient's having and what those patients were prescribed, then you can start to create population reports based on that. So if a patient or X hundreds of thousands of patients have received a certain type of medication and that medication has worked or hasn't worked, they can start to build those models and see what the best method is for their patient based on what they've seen and based on their own knowledge to prescribe that. To answer your question on the technology, the recipe is constantly growing. There are constantly companies coming up with new and innovative technologies to better assist all of these different processes and business drivers for the healthcare industry that we've really talked about. And that's the data, the big data analytics, the harvesting and federation of structured and unstructured data that really exists out there. Because if you think about hospitals and how many times they go through the evolution of technology, because they're constantly being sold technology year after year. So now you have all these silos of data that reside in all these different technologies, and having those silos being able to speak to each other is always a problem. So when all these companies come through, it's a matter of connecting the technologies together, connecting these data sources, and making sense of that data for them as on a real-time basis as the data starts to come in.
So there are several layers of complication. So the ability of understanding data across silos, as well as the specific task that is being carried. So the task could be either making a recommendation for the patient, or it could be detecting something for the patient. If we just for a second look at this variety of dimensions, you have the being able to work with different data sets and the dimension of the different type of specific task that technology is looking at. Have you noticed, in your experience, an evolution also on the core technology? I mean, the algorithms, the approaches that are taken, or it's more the packaging still that is winning the marketplace?
It's not necessarily, it's a combination of both, but if you think about the algorithms and the people that are creating those algorithms, they're the data scientists. So the more algorithms that they create that is able to manipulate that data and bring in the right type of data is what's going to change in the next 3, 5, and 10 years. If you think about kind of where the future of health tech as a whole is going, it's going to really be those algorithms on how fast they can think and process and push out that information.
The fast in this case seems to be an important element in providing the service. It goes hand in hand with the fact that the telemedicine premise is that you can be more effective. However, if we look also at other drivers that are here, that is, for example, the costs and so on, are people pushing the infrastructures to the limits, or there are cost concerns and other business drivers that require to be a compromise between performances and costs?
So the business drivers are really the market and what the market is asking for. If you're thinking about kind of real-time results, right? What is that going to be effective for? So if you have a patient that has a mobile device and you have that mobile device with an application, the longer that patient waits, the less likely it is they're going to continue to use that application. So that's one. The second piece is for the companies that are making the investments in these companies to bring in the technology, it's a pretty big investment. It's in the millions of dollars sometimes. The drivers are how often and who the market is for them that they'll continue to use this. Typically with any technology, new technology that you bring in, what you want to do is you want to save money and you want to speed up the process. So that gives you more sales from patients to whatever that, if it's B2B or B2B2C, whatever that might be. It's a matter of how much more revenue can you create based on this efficiency. So that's what the business drivers really come down to, is the efficiency and the revenue growth, right, for the company to put in the evaluation of bringing in new technology.
But looking now at the business side of this, this is a very complex industry where on the one hand, you have the economy of the individual company, but you have the entire legislation/regulations of the entire ecosystem. There are multiple stakeholders. How do you go about introducing a new product in an industry like this? What has been your experience? And if you like, where have you seen the difference in introducing a new product in this industry compared to other ones?
Irregardless of the domain, with any new product or technology, introducing them is again based on the biggest problem that they're solving and who those people are that they're going after. It becomes your messaging. That's a big marketing component. So marketing, product, and engineering have to work very close for them to understand what is this problem, what is this solution, and how are we attacking it. And the biggest piece is who's going to be the buyer. So in order to do that, you have to find out who your buyers are. Is it a B2B? Is it a business process that you're taking care of? Or is it a complete consumer? Each one of those have different processes on how to reach that audience to be able to buy them. There's a phase that I go through, which is called REGE, recruit, enable, go to market, execute. So the recruitment piece is finding that right partner or the customer that maps out to your platform. The enablement is the technology you have that's viable for them. If it's a partner, the two technologies that you have and how they'll intertwine and create a solution for this problem. The G is the go-to-market, right? So this is where product, engineering, marketing, everybody gets together and figures out how to really articulate the messaging that you want to move to this next piece, which is the E, the execution, which is when you actually start selling. So you want to make sure your sales guys have all the right material, all the right ammunition to be able to take this and be able to explain the messaging right off their cuff. So it's a process that you have to, it's nothing that comes overnight. These are things that you have to continuously, it's just like fundraising. You have to continuously meet with people, give them their pitch, get back the results, right? What the feedback is, and move to the next one. Once you have a combination of all these things, then you can put down your elevator pitch and start selling your stuff.
So in your opinion, looking at, you've been involved in so many startups, without mentioning which one, but could you name a couple of examples where maybe one sales/marketing adoption strategy was particularly successful and why? And maybe name another one, without going into the details, of course, where there were more problems and why? What are the mistakes that can be made during that process?
I'll talk about that. I won't name the companies, but I'll give you an example. The biggest problem, I'll start with that one, a lot of companies make is really understanding who they are and who they want to be when they grow up, right? And that means based on what they have, who are they selling to? Are they a B2B company or are they a B2C company? A lot of times companies make the mistake of picking the wrong one and going after that market and hiring and building around that market without really understanding what it means. So that's always a problem. So you end up going through cycles and cycles of spending money and the wrong people that you bring into the ecosystem. So that's a problem, really understanding who you are, right? On the flip side, the good part is building a company with, again, depending on once you figure that out, the approach that I've always taken, and it's been successful with the companies that I've worked with, is taking more of a channel approach, meaning that finding the right channel partner that can take your product or solution, possibly combining it with theirs and doing a sell to, sell through. So now what you've done is you're selling your product to the mass market without hiring a ton of sales reps. Okay, so you establish a few of these distribution partnerships. They're selling your product. You have the logos. You gain the revenues without hiring a ton of people. Now you start to learn how your product actually does in the market. You start to learn how much and where you can sell these things in the mass market. Then you can start to pivot on who you need to hire and how the company will grow.
It's a great insight. I'd like to follow up really a little bit on this. And it's because some of the audience are owners of startups, people that are facing this type of challenges, or they might be executives or managers in companies that are looking to find a way. They have an idea. They want to find a way to move from there to make their idea a reality. And so lots of these concepts, they're really useful. So what I would like to follow up with is the partner strategy type of approach always come with the problem, which is how much your partner is motivated. So how do you go about minimizing that problem?
Well, that's a tough one. I mean, it's trial and error. You have to try, you have to go out, and it's a lot of homework that you have to do based on the experience you have and the experience that your team has and who your team are, right? So based on the size of the startup, typically what you would want in a startup is at least one technical guy and one business guy that have the experience to do the combination. And hopefully, if they sold to some market, whether it's health tech or media entertainment or whatever it might be, to find out what that is. But it's really a trial and error. You have to go out and you have to speak to these people. And that's the first step, which is very difficult for a lot of startups, believe it or not, to actually go out and speak and ask questions. And those questions you ask at least have to be the right questions, so that people, if they are taking a meeting because a friend of a friend has referred them to you, they're not just shaking their head or playing on their iPhone. They're actually getting it, and they're asking you the right questions in return.
So in my view, that's a tremendous insight. I think the sales adoption part is where most of the entrepreneurs have a challenge. So our time is limited. I'd like to move on something probably exciting, which is what's next. So you've been looking at these small startups for a number of years. So you've been part of dreaming the future. So what is the future that you dream in the field of healthcare, and how do you see artificial intelligence playing a role a little bit, in the long term?
So if you think about, again, the future of healthcare, and where I'm putting my focus on is really on the future of telemedicine from a global perspective. This year I spent a lot of time all around the globe, but a lot of time here not here in Silicon Valley, but in the UAE. And I'm looking at areas where there is mass adoption for technology and growth. And if you think about the next decade, right, on where healthcare is going, and this is why one of the reasons that I chose the three industries, these three buckets that we've talked about for health tech, fintech, and IoT. If you think about artificial intelligence at the core and what a lot of the automotive industry is doing, where they're putting their investments in is the health tech aspect of this. If you sit in your car, the car should be able to understand through your iris or through your palms of your hand how sweaty you are, or your heart rate if there's something wrong with you. based on your location from an IoT standpoint, if the light pole next to you or the lamp here or the wherever you're sitting should know your location, and there should be, this is where the Internet of Things, where one thing can talk to another and basically communicate to the car, to the police, to the ambulance, that there's something wrong with this individual. So there are a lot of things, again, where artificial intelligence really comes through, is learning more and more about that specific person, because there's so much data that really resides as you as an individual, right? Everything from what you do every day. Most people don't know, even if you don't have any health applications running on your phone, with a simple iPhone, it already knows how many steps you're walking. It knows where you've been, what stores you've walked into, all based on the phone, on the location-based services that are on there. So the more and more that phone learns about you, and this is where you see a lot of ad tech coming, without knowing, if you run any of these applications, Facebook, Instagram, you start to see more and more advertisements based on the locations that you've been to or the countries that you've traveled to. This is where artificial intelligence and machine learning is really going. From a health tech perspective, the more and more we learn about ourselves, the better we can take care of ourselves moving forward.
This one is really an exciting view of the future. I think it embeds the idea that there's going to be services and capabilities that will go behind what our imagination is today, because our imagination today is based on the status quo. But when we have all these many systems interacting with one another, they might create a better overall situation for that person, where not only it's the healthcare, but it's what can happen. If you get a problem with your heart while you are in a car, you're going to get more easily helped, because the entire ecosystem will understand that you need help. That's, in summary, what we're talking about, something that is not possible today. What do you think the obstacle to that vision are going to be, and what are the most realistic things that we'll be likely to see in the next decade?
You know, the obstacles are easy, as in anything. The obstacles are knowledge and adaptation of the technologies, right? A lot of these industries, people like doing things the way they've been doing things for the last few decades. So having them adapt and understand and utilize new technologies is always a difficult piece. That's really where the sales and the marketing piece comes in, is to help them understand, give them that knowledge, and show them why a technology like this, whatever it might be, can better their lives on a daily basis.
So that's very important. It's one of the reasons why, I invited you, and I like so much inviting professionals accomplished like you in the field of sales, marketing, adoption of technology, because I think it's a crucial point in taking a new industry to its full fruition for the people. So Reza, I want to thank you so much for being here. This has been a great conversation on my side. For our audience, so what we talked today is basically how AI is affecting medicine, particularly telemedicine sector. What would be the future? How startups are changing this sector, but particularly how they market and commercialize the technology in such a complex market. So if you're interested in this topic, please comment below. If you want more content for us and you have suggestions, please comment below. And we look forward to hosting you here again. So thank you so much, Reza.
Thank you.